Good evening. You might notice I'm in my pajamas tonight. It's bedtime for me, just like it is for you. And I wanted to not go to bed without sharing a special story with you. This is the story of Black Beauty. I don't know if my dad was really a reader because I never much saw him read a book. But every time I would ask him to read me a book or anything, doesn't matter what it was, my dad would always tell me the same story, and he'd say, "This is the story of Black Beauty. Black Beauty went down the road, clippity-clop, clippity-clop." And I would get mad and frustrated, and sometimes I would even cry, and I would say, "No, I want to read this book." But he would tell me the story of Black Beauty. And you know, when I got older, I got that book, Black Beauty, and I read the whole book, and it really is a good story. So that's what I'd like to share with you tonight. Sit down, get comfortable. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read every word because I think it's worth it. It's a little picture, and Black Beauty is the young horse there. And that's where we'll start. Not a lot of pictures, but enjoy. When I was a very young foal, I lived in a pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. In the daytime, I ran by my mother's side, and at night I lay down close beside her. She was a wise old horse and used to tell me, "I hope you will grow up gentle and good and never learn bad ways. Do your work with a good will. Lift your feet up well when you trot. Never bite or kick, even if playing." And I have never forgotten her advice. My master was a kind man. He gave us good food and good housing, and he spoke as kindly to us as he did to his own children. We all loved him. I began to grow handsome. My coat was fine, soft, and black, and I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. My master broke me in himself, rather than leaving it to a groom. With a good deal of coaxing, oats, pats, and gentle words, he taught me to wear a saddle and bridle and to carry a man, woman, or child on my back, to go quietly, just the way they wished, and to pull a carriage by holding a bit. I didn't like the bit. The bit is what they put in your mouth so that they can lead you with the reins. My mother always wore one when she went out, so at last I followed her example and got used to wearing it. My mother always told me the better I behaved, the better I would be treated, and that I should always do my best to please my master. "I hope you will fall into good hands," she said, "but a horse never knows who may buy him or who may drive him. It is all down to chance for us, but still I say, you do your best." I was 4 years old when I was sold and taken to Bristol's Britwork Park. I was put in a clean, airy stable with a friendly little gray pony and a tall chestnut mare with a long, handsome neck. The groom, John Manley, seemed very proud of me and called me Black Beauty. He would talk to me a great deal. Of course, I did not understand all that he said, but I began to learn what he meant and what he wanted. James Howard, the stable boy, was just as gentle and pleasant, so I thought myself quite well off. A few days after my arrival, I had to go out with the chestnut mare Ginger in the carriage. Now, Ginger had a habit of biting and snapping, so I wondered how we would get along. But except for a little angry pointing her ears back when I first got to her, she behaved very well. After we had been together a few times, she told me her story. It was so different from my own. Ginger had been taken from her mother when she was first a baby. She was broke in by force with no kind words from her master and sold to a fashionable gentleman. This man held the horses' heads up with a check rein, a special type of rein that stops horses from lowering their heads. I had to hold my head up for hours at a time, not able to move it at all, explained Ginger, her nostrils flaring at the memory. My master thought it looked stylish, I was ready and willing to work, but I was tormented for nothing but his fancy angered me. So I began to snap and kick. Of course, it is a very different at Birtwick Park, but who knows how long this will last. I felt sorry for Ginger, but I knew very little back then. As the weeks rolled on, Ginger grew more gentle and cheerful, and she lost that nervous, angry look that she used to have. After I had been living at Birtwick Park for some months, my master and mistress decided to go visit friends. They lived a 2-day drive away. Ginger and I were harnessed up and James drove the carriage. We traveled the whole first day, and just as the sun was going down, we reached a hotel. Ginger and I were put in the stables to spend the night. Later that evening, a young man smoking a pipe came into the stable. He chatted to the groom, then went to the loft to bring down some hay. Then the man and groom left the stable and locked the door for the night. I cannot say how long I slept, but when I awoke, the air was thick and choking with smoke. Low crackling and snapping sounds made me tremble all over. The other horses in the stall pulled at their halters and stamped in terror. At last, a groom rushed in and began to untie us and lead us out. But he seemed in such a hurry and was so frightened himself, he actually scared us even more. Then I heard a cry of, "Fire!" outside, and James quickly came in. He quietly took off his scarf and tied it over my eyes so that I couldn't see anything that might scare me. Patting and coaxing, James led me out of the stable to safety. Then he went back in and saved Ginger. Smoke poured out and I could see flashes of red light. Then I heard a crash as something fell inside. The next moment, James came through the smoke, leading Ginger. She was coughing violently and James was unable to speak, but luckily they were all right. The young man had left his pipe in the hayloft, and it had set the stable on fire. Thanks to James, Ginger and I were both saved, but 2 of the horses inside could not be brought outside, and they were not safe. It was a terrible night. After 3 happy years at Birtwick Park, sad changes came over us. One night I was fast asleep when the groom, John Manley, ran into the stable and cried, "Wake up, Beauty! Your mistress is near death. We must go fetch the doctor. There is not a moment to lose." Oh my, away we went out into the night. "Now, Beauty, do your best," said John. Just over here. And so I did. I don't believe that my old grandfather, who won the race at Newmarket, could have gone faster. The church clock struck 3 in the morning as we drew up at Dr. White's door. His own horse was exhausted by a hard day's riding, so even though I was very tired myself, there was no option but for me to take the doctor back to the hall. The doctor was a heavier man than John and not a very good rider. However, I did my very best. When we got home, my legs shook under me and I could only stand and pant. I did not have a dry hair on my whole body. The doctor went into the house and Joe, the new stable boy, took charge of me. Now, poor Joe. He was young and as yet he knew very little. He didn't even put a warm cloth on me. He should have, as he thought I was hot and would not like it. And then he gave me cold water to drink, which tasted good but chilled my stomach. Soon I began to shake and tremble. By the time John returned, having walked home from the doctor's house, I had turned deadly cold. I was sick for weeks afterward, and John nursed me night and day. My mistress recovered, but shortly afterward, we heard that she must leave England for a warmer country in order to get well. My master had to sell everything, including all his horses. On our last day together, Ginger and I sadly carried the master and mistress on their final journey to the railway station, and they said goodbye to us. Then we drove slowly home, but it wasn't even our home now. Ginger and I were sold to a gentleman who lived in a fine house called Earl's Hall Park. When John delivered us to our new stables, he told the groom he had never used a check rein on either of us, that we were good horses. Well, said the groom, they must wear the check rein here. My lady will have style, and the carriage horses, if they're not reined up tight, she won't even look at them. There's a picture of her and the stable boy and the horses. I held my face close to John's. That was all I could do to say goodbye, and he was gone. The next afternoon, we were hitched to the carriage with our heads held up by the check rein. When my lady appeared, she looked at us and did not seem pleased, but she said nothing and got in the carriage. Though it certainly was a nuisance, the rain was bearable for me. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and content. But over the next few days, that lady insisted our heads were reined higher and higher and higher, and I began to understand what Ginger had told me. I wanted to put my head forward and pull the carriage with a will, as we had been used to doing, but I couldn't, and that took all the spirit out of me and put strain on my back and legs. If they rein me up tight, said Ginger, why, let 'em look out. I can't bear it, and I won't. Finally, it became too much for Ginger. When the groom tried to tighten her reins, she reared up so suddenly he had his nose hit and his hat was knocked off. She was never put with the carriage again, and as for me, they gave me a new partner. What I suffered with that rein for 4 months in my lady's carriage is hard to describe. The sharp bit made me froth at the mouth, and there was pressure on my windpipe, which made my breathing very uncomfortable. There was no relief in sight. I must now say a little bit about Reuben Smith, who was left in charge of the stables when the groom went to London on the master's business. Reuben was gentle how he managed horses, but he had a very forgetful and lazy nature. You see Reuben?
Yep.
I just had to have a drink. Reuben had nearly lost his job in the past because he was so lazy. I was unlucky enough to be in his care, and he got careless again. One spring day, he left me at the hotel stables while he ran errands in town. He told the groom to have me ready at 4 o'clock, but he didn't come for me until 9 at night. He had ran into friends and was partying and lost track of time. A nail in one of my front shoes had started to come loose, and the groom told Reuben it needed looking at, but Reuben was so late, he didn't even care. He just hurried off, and we went into the night without further delay. He made me gallop. We traveled far and fast until my shoe came off. Reuben didn't notice, and my shoeless foot suffered dreadfully. My hoof was split, and the inside flesh was cut. No horse can even keep his footing under such circumstances. I stumbled and fell on both knees, and Reuben was thrown off the horse. After one slight effort to rise, he did not move again. We were far from town, and it was nearly midnight before men came to help us. Reuben Smith died that night. Poor man. Because of his rough riding, my knees were so scarred and ugly, I was no longer fit to work in the stables. I was sold and taken away, and I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to Ginger. I became a job horse, which means I was hired out to all sorts of people. As I was good-natured and gentle, I think I was more often let out to ignorant drivers than some of the other horses. One day I went out in a carriage with a careless driver who let the reins just lie on my back. His own hands were sitting on his knees. There were other loose stones on the road, and he never thought it worthwhile to drive where the road was smooth. The result was that I got a stone in my foot. Any good driver would have seen immediately that something was wrong, but this man was laughing and talking with his friends, and with every step, the stone became more and more firmly put in my foot. The driver finally noticed I was looking and complained I was being lame, but a farmer rode up and said, "I beg your pardon, sir, but that horse must have a stone in his shoe. If you will allow me, I will look at his foot." Sure enough, the farmer found the offending stone, carefully dislodged it with a stone pick, and showed it to the driver. "Well," said the driver, "I never knew horses could pick up stones before." "Didn't you?" said the farmer. "Well, they do, and if you don't want to lame your horse, you must look sharp and get them out quickly. If I might advise, sir, you'd better drive him gently for a while. That foot is very hurt." Then mounting his own horse and raising his hat, the farmer trotted off. My driver began to flop the reins just like before, and I knew I was to go on. Nothing changed, but at least that stone was gone. After some months of working in this way, I was put up for sale at a horse sale. There were long strings of young horses from the country, shaggy little Welsh ponies, hundreds of cart horses of all sorts with their long tails braided up and tied with cord, and a good many like myself, handsome and high-bred, but who had suffered an accident or had a blemish. There were some splendid horses in their prime and fit for anything, but in the background were a lot of poor animals, broken down by hard work. It was a sad sight for a horse to look upon and wonder if he was in that same bad state. I was put with some useful-looking horses, and a good number of people came to look at us. The gentlemen always turned away from me, though, when they saw my ugly, scarred knees. But one man seemed interested in me, and I could tell I'd be happy with him. He was not a gentleman. He was just a little, small man, but I could tell he knew horses. He spoke gently, and his gray eyes looked kind. He offered a small sum of money for me, but they refused. And then a very mean, hard-looking, loud-voiced man came. I was dreadfully afraid this man would buy me. I could not help reaching out my head toward the gray-eyed man. He stroked my face gently. "Well, old chap," he said, "I think we'll suit each other." He paid a large amount of money on the spot, and half an hour later we were on our way to London, through pleasant lanes and roads. My new master was Jeremiah Baker, but everyone called him Jerry, and I will do the same. He was married to Polly, and they had 2 children. Harry, who was nearly 12 years old, and Dorothy, or Dolly as they called her, who was 8. Jerry had a cab and drove 2 horses, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. In this way, all horses got a proper rest, and he never worked on Sunday. It was his golden rule. Even when the most loyal customers would ask him, he would say, "I used to work 7 days, but it was too hard for me and too hard for my horses. They need rest, and I will spend Sunday with my wife and children." The first week of my life as a cab horse was very trying. I was not used to the city of London and the noise, the hurry, and the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages all made me feel anxious and harassed, but I soon found out I could trust my driver. I got used to the bustle of the city. In a short time, my master and I understood each other. Jerry was a good driver, and even better, he thought as much about his horse as he did himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best, and I believe his whip was more frequently by his side than in his hand. In the stable, too, he did all that he could for our comfort. He kept us very clean and gave us a lot of food, and always kept us nice with fresh water, both night and day. But the best thing of all was Sunday off work. One day, while we were waiting outside one of the parks, a shabby old cab drove up beside ours. The horse was a worn-out old chestnut with an ill-kept coat and bones that showed through it. The horse's knees buckled over, and her forelegs were very unsteady. I heard a little voice, and there was a hopeless look in her eyes. I looked to see better, and she said, "Black Beauty, is that you?" It was Ginger, but oh, how she had changed. Her neck was lank, her legs were swollen, her joints were out of shape from the hard work. Her face, once so full of spirit and life, was full of suffering. Our drivers were standing together a little ways off, so I sidled up to her so that we could have a quiet talk. It was a sad tale she had. Ginger was sold the year after I left. For a while all was well, but then her breathing got bad. No doubt the result of being reined up so tightly in her youth. She was sold again and again until she was bought by a man who was mean to the horses. You look well off, and I am glad of it, said Ginger, but I could not tell you what my life has been. They work me hard all the week with no day's rest. I was very much troubled, and I put my nose up to hers. I could say nothing to comfort her. Just then her driver appeared, and with a tug at her mouth, he drove her away. A short time after this, a cart with a dead horse in it passed by. It was a chestnut horse with a long, thick neck. I believe it was Ginger. Actually, I hope it was, for then her troubles would have gone away. Then came a day when Jerry and I did work on a Sunday, and this is how it happened. One Sunday morning, Jerry was cleaning me in the yard when Polly ran up to him. That was his wife. My dear, my friend Dinah Brown has a letter saying her mother is dangerously ill and she must go immediately. She lives over 10 miles away out in the country. The train won't take her all the way there. And she has a baby too. Could you take her in your cab? Well, Polly, you know it's against the golden rule, said Jerry. But we should do for other people like we'd like them to do for us. You just tell Dinah I'll be there at 10. I was chosen for the job, and at 10 o'clock on the dot we started out. It was a fine May day, and the sweet country air was good in my nostrils. When we finally reached Dinah's family home, which was a small farmhouse close to a meadow, a young man offered to tie me up in the cowshed, apologizing there wasn't a better stable. That's kind, said Jerry, but there is nothing my horse would like so well as to have an hour or two playing in the meadow. It would be a rare treat for him. The young man agreed to this plan. When my harness was taking off, I did not know what I should do first, whether to eat the grass or just gallop around. I just had wonderful feeling of being free, so I took turns doing everything. Jerry seemed to be quite as happy as I was and took it easy under a shade tree until it was time to return to London. The following Christmas and New Year were very merry for some people, but for me and my master, they brought sadness and a parting. Late night working with snow, sleet, or heavy rain every day took its toll on us both. Jerry got bronchitis and became dangerously ill. When he got better, the doctor said he could never work again with the cab. So Jerry and the family moved out to the country, and he took a job as a coachman. The cab and horses were sold. It was the saddest day of my life for me. At the horse sale, I found myself in the company of the old, lame, sick horses. After 3 years of cab work, I was not the horse I had been. Many men looked at me and turned away, and then an old gentleman approached with a young boy by his side. I saw his eye rest on me, and I picked my ears and listened. "There's a horse, Willie," he said, "that has known better days. Poor old fellow, couldn't you buy him and make him young again like you did with Ladybird, our horse?" The old gentleman laughed, and he felt my legs, looked at my mouth, and asked me to trot around. And then he bought me. And that is how I came to my last home. That old gentleman gave me to 3 ladies in the neighborhood who needed a good, safe horse to pull their carriage. And that groom turned out to be Joe Green, the same stable boy I knew from my very first home. He was now a confident young man, and I have been living in this happy place a whole year. Joe is the best of grooms, clever, and always a kind word. My work is easy and my strength and spirit are returning. The ladies have promised I shall never be sold, so I have nothing to fear. And here my story ends. That was a long one. I hope you made it, and I hope you loved the story of Black Beauty. Good night. Bedtime for me. I love you.